We've all had those days with greasy skin, right? And sometimes we can attribute it to like we had a super oily meal, or maybe we just didn't shower and we just get a little bit greasy. And yeah, sometimes that leads to acne and things like that too. But when you're an adult and you get chronically greasy skin and weird flare-ups of acne, it's a warning sign for things. Now, there's a lot of different things that can go on, but when you start looking at the data, you really do understand, oh, wait a minute, this has a very clear link to metabolic issues. And I'm gonna highlight that and also how you can correct it. So let's go ahead and dive in. After today's video, there is a 30% off discount link for Thrive Market down below. That means 30% off your entire grocery order. It's not like a regular grocery store. I love Thrive because it's just, I can choose diets that I want to do. Like I always experiment with different diets. Sometimes I do paleo, sometimes I do carnivore, sometimes I'm strict keto, sometimes I'm more moderate carb. So I can just do my shopping and just sort by whatever diet I'm doing. It's the easiest thing in the world, and I don't have to spend 2 hours at the grocery store. So if you're really trying to just explore and experiment and do different things, it is definitely the place for you. So that link saves you 30% off your entire first grocery order, whether you spend $100 or $5,000, 30% off, plus a $50 free gift. So don't forget to check them out down below in the description. We have to jump into this whole greasy skin issue with a study that really paints it quite well. Okay, it was published in Advances in Dermatology. I like this study because it was a larger study. It looked at lots of people, giving us more data. 243 people with greasy skin and little bits of acne and things like that, and 156 control people that did not have greasy skin or acne. Now, what they looked at here was their levels of glucose and their levels of insulin resistance with HOMA-IR. Here's what they found. Glucose between the two groups didn't really make a difference. So high glucose, low glucose, it was all over the place. But what made a difference, what they noticed, is that the people with the greasy skin had high levels of insulin. And the people without the greasy skin didn't have high levels of insulin. Why is this important? Because insulin, independent of your glucose levels, tells you a lot. So you could have high levels of glucose and not necessarily be insulin resistant, right? Like you could just eat some food that's high glucose, or you could just be someone that's a little bit hyperglycemic, but not necessarily insulin resistant. But when you become insulin resistant, you have some serious issues going on that need dramatic lifestyle intervention. Okay, I can talk about that towards the end of this video, like things you can do. But what's very interesting is that, yeah, with this, glucose didn't really matter, insulin mattered. And why this is important is because it is a very clear picture. It's easy to track your glucose. It's easy to measure your blood and see where your glucose is at. Measuring your insulin is a more difficult thing. You can't just walk into your doctor and say, test my insulin, unless you have really good insurance or a concierge doctor. They're not just gonna do it. You definitely can't just go get what's called a HOMA-IR, which is where you're testing your longer tail levels of insulin. Now, I'm not saying that greasy skin is going to take the place of a HOMA-IR or insulin test, but if you wake up every day and you have greasy skin, and you also see that you have high glucose, and you're like, I wonder if I'm insulin resistant, all the stars are kind of aligning that way, right? And it might be worth an extra nudge to your doctor to do some tests. Now, I'm a mechanistic guy too. I don't just like to say observational data matters. So we have to understand what happens here. Now, I want you to think for a second about little Teddy when he was 13 years old going through puberty, right? Okay, his voice is cracking, but he's also starting to get some pimples everywhere, and he looks like a walking croissant. He's all greasy and just kind of gross, right? Well, okay, poor Teddy has a bunch of hormones that are raging right now. Well, what does this have to do with insulin? Insulin is a hormone, okay? But it's a unique hormone, and it also drives up what are called androgens. Now, specifically in men, but also in women, androgens that are high are going to make your skin greasy, and they're going to be, well, in some ways they're anabolic and can be good. Insulin is actually a very anabolic hormone if you're trying to build muscle, but it doesn't mean you want it high all the time. Now, additionally, what happens with this is when insulin and IGF, respectively, are elevated and androgens are elevated, you also have a decrease in what's called sex hormone binding globulin. Now, if you have a decrease in sex hormone binding globulin, it means your hormones are high with nowhere to accurately bind. So they're kind of skyrocketing out of control. Again, normal for Teddy going through puberty, not normal for Bob, who's 46 years old driving a BMW, right? It's a different world. So we do have to consider this. If you're greasy skin and you're having these weird characteristics, that's not normal in your 40s. Now we also have to look at another piece of the equation too. When insulin drives up and subsequently IGF drives up, that causes its own set of issues. So IGF goes up, but then what we've noticed in people that are insulin resistant is that their IGF binding protein goes down. So now you have high levels of IGF, which is insulin-like growth factor. So responsible for a lot of important things, but too much is also bad. And when the binding protein that it attaches to is lower, then you have more circulating IGF. What this does is it can signal skin cells, keratinocytes, to kind of become all cattywampus with their proliferation and their apoptosis, their like programmed death. So what happens is you end up with weird kind of skin cell, not necessarily formation, possibly formation, skin tags, things like that, but usually the improper degradation, which leads to the oil glands producing more oil. Okay, so with this, what happens? Acne, oily, greasy skin. Now let's cut right to the chase on things you can do, and it's not rocket science. Okay, if you start noticing these symptoms arising, the first thing you can do, if you're not wanting to go keto, is at least reduce your carbohydrate intake down to less than 20% carbohydrates per day. It's not the end of the world, and it's totally reasonable to do. Okay, down below 20%. Now, what I would recommend is if you're going to go low carb, you might as well go all the way, because being low carb might make you fatigued. But if you go a little bit deeper and actually try going like super low carb, like keto, then you actually produce ketones that gives you an extra layer of energy. But if you don't go deep enough, then you're just kind of sitting in this low carb gray area where you feel fatigued and foggy. So that's my recommendation, like personal experience, is you're better off to just go below 10% carbohydrates. But if you're really like concerned with it, just try going below 20% and it'll make a difference. Another thing that we do have to factor in is like how we pair our food with meals, like how we like pair our different things. One thing I would really recommend that makes a tremendous difference that I noticed when I was pre-diabetic was that eating the protein on my plate first made a huge difference in my glycemic response and actually controlled my blood sugar. And that was probably the most important thing I could do when I was intermittent fasting, was load with protein first, because then I didn't have these big spikes during my eating period, and I was able to actually control my glucose much better. And I was able to get a check on my pre-diabetes when I was like 300 pounds in like 4 or 5 months with that. And that was like the biggest check mark that I made on my diet. So hopefully those little tactics will help. But more importantly, let this just be a sign for you that you need to do something. And I have other videos that explain how to deal with it. I'll see you tomorrow.